It was a really cold Friday evening. A middle-aged doctor, podiatrist, was walking home when he tripped on a bottle of horseradish and sprains his ankle. He picks it up, and totally out of character for him because he really is a nice, law-abiding family man, he hurls it across the street through the window of a store and shatters it. No one saw him, so he gets into a cab and goes home. This is fiction, and it's the basis of a novel by Peter Melman. He was a writer and producer for the TV show Seinfeld. He coined some of the show's more memorable phrases. Peter Melman's book is called It Won't Always Be This Great, and he joins me in the studio. Peter, welcome.
So good to be here. I like the way you said the title. It won't always be this great. You put the accent on a different word. I like that.
So why did your character throw that bottle through the glass?
He just had a moment of losing it because, part of it is that he's 51 years old and he still plays basketball and it's still a joy in his life. And as soon as you turn your ankle like that, your first thought is, I'll never play again. That, I think, is the most obvious reason that drove him crazy. But there's also all this undercurrent in his life of feeling pent up, feeling like he never really expresses himself, He loves his wife and he loves his family, but he lives in suburbia and he feels kind of stymied. Suburbia is kind of a crushing experience in certain ways. You feel like the level of tact you need just to get through life in suburbia can be, overwhelming. So I just think there was also something kind of bubbling down deep inside him that just made him
is this a midlife crisis?
Let loose. It's about the quickest midlife crisis in the world. Maybe I don't think he ever was having a midlife crisis, and then, maybe the adrenaline you get from pain caused him to his midlife crisis to kind of click.
Typically, a good upstanding citizen like this podiatrist would call the police or the store owner. He would apologize profusely. He would pay for the damages, and that would be the end of it. He doesn't do that.
No, for some reason. One thing, again, it exists on two levels. He's a big fan of Law and Order. So immediately he looks at the surveillance cameras and realizes the way they're tilted, he's out of range. And it's a freezing cold night, so he's wearing gloves, so his fingerprints would not be on the bottle that he's thrown. On the other hand, he's thrown this, and he's suddenly done this one outlaw thing, and I think part of him inside just wants to see it through a little bit, just wants to continue that little bit of not doing the right thing all the time, not being the perfect citizen. So he just walks away. Do you ever go to parties and decide to leave without saying goodbye to anyone? This is something that I just love. I recently discovered, before I wrote the book like a few years ago.
I should try that. I have never tried that.
The amount of arrogance that you feel, the self-absorbed arrogance that you feel that you have to really say goodbye to everybody as if anybody's going to say the next day, yeah, but you know what? Mimi didn't say goodbye. Like that's going to be the whole conversation, and there's just something great about taking off.
This guy does get a bit of a high from this act that he does.
Yes. He kind of gets like a 2 or 3 day high where all of a sudden his attitudes change a little bit. He's a little bit freer with his opinions. His deepest feelings kind of come out. And, again, he has absolutely no complaints with his wife. In fact, I think the most unique thing about this novel is that it's the story of a man who actually loves his wife after 25 years of marriage.
I do want to talk about that. But first, let me say the novel we're talking about is called It Won't Always Be This Great. Peter Melman is a TV writer. He was a writer and producer for the TV show Seinfeld, and this is his first novel. I thought that was so refreshing that he just loves his wife so much. He thinks that she's too good for him. But aren't bad marriages funnier?
I think bad marriages may be funnier, but they're also so much more common. And everything you read, you never read about a good marriage. It's
true.
It's hard to even imagine the thought of somebody like putting fiction around a good marriage. And, like early on in the book, I think it started to have him make one little crack about his wife, and it felt awful to me as I was writing it. And not only did it feel awful, it felt, like, what am I, Henny Youngman? I'm going to start making jokes about his wife, So that's when I just decided, you know what? He seems to really love his wife. Let's just follow this. Let's just see what a good relationship might entail.
And Peter, you never married, right?
That is correct. I've had narrow escapes.
Is this how you imagine the perfect marriage?
I guess so. I mean, in certain ways, I imagine it. I mean, I'm nothing like the narrator of this story. There are certain autobiographical details that are similar, having gone to the University of Maryland, having grown up in Queens, but I'm nothing like this character.
You play basketball.
I do play basketball.
You watch a lot of Law and Order.
Not so much. I did it one time. But I do always think that if you watch enough police shows, you should be able to get away with just about anything. I mean,
don't tell people that.
You murder somebody, you just sprinkle around someone else's DNA. Boom, you're done.
How
you're free.
awful.
I know it's awful, but it's a predatory world.
This guy, after his initial high of this, he doesn't really feel guilty, which is strange. You would think that somebody like him would start to feel guilty that he's done this thing. It's starting to, get out of hand, and he's still enjoying himself.
Yeah, the only thing that makes him feel a little guilty, that gives him a little pause, is that ultimately somebody else is suspected of the crime. And I think you get the feeling all throughout that if things went really bad for this guy, he would probably fess up. But, he's just in this zone where he needs to follow through on this. And he's not a person who follows through on things, which is most evidenced by who the narrator is talking to throughout this novel. This is the first time he's telling the story of what happened to him, and he's telling it to his college roommate who happens to be in a coma.
Mm-hmm. So he can never respond.
Right. That's very typical of this narrator. He's telling the story, but he's not really telling the story. And he's almost telling the story for his own benefit, just to get a grip on what happened to him.
And to hear it out loud.
Mind, and to hear it out loud. So, it's almost like he's talking to his own conscience.
So the owner of the store is Orthodox Jewish, and immediately this is considered to be an anti-Semitic hate crime.
Right.
And things start to spiral out of control because of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of my hugest pet peeves about society in general is that it all seems like everyone in the world is sitting at home waiting to be offended somehow. With Orthodox Jews, it's generally on the lookout for anti-Semitism no matter what. And it's a reflexive reaction. And the thing is, I think throughout the novel, you start learning more and more about this prominent Orthodox Jew who owns the store. And you realize it's almost a reflex with him, but it's not something that he totally feels right about in his heart. Like you realize that part of him is going through the motions with this. This is how he's supposed to be. He's a prominent Jewish figure in the neighborhood.
Elise, the wife of the main character, she's accused of being a self-hating Jew. What does that mean?
I don't know what it means anymore. I think it's an expression. It's one of those expressions that just got around and became kind of a stereotype. There's all different kinds of Jews. There's the Jap stereotype, and then there's the self-hating Jew stereotype of the person who, is Jewish but doesn't like to broadcast it, doesn't really stand up for Israel loudly enough. That is what's certain more, I don't want to say fanatical Jews are, but if you're not at their level of passion, they think you're self-hating. And that expression's actually been around for quite a while, since Jews came to America and did so much assimilation. The Jews who assimilated more were castigated by the Jews who assimilated less. The ones who changed their name from Goldstein to, whatever, or, the ones who changed their name from Katz to Kates or something like that. They got a lot of grief from people who no, you got to put your Jewishness right out there in front and be proud.
I liked her, when somebody says to her, you're a self-hating Jew, her response was, no, I'm a you-hating Jew, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
The book we're discussing is called It Won't Always Be This Great. Peter Melman is in the studio with me. He's an author, TV writer, and this is his first novel.
Does that imply that I have to write a second?
You actually do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did they not tell you? You're
no,
committed now?
I'll get right on it, Mimi.
Peter, you don't have any kids, but the character in the book is really a great dad. He's devoted to his kids. He's so proud of them, loves them. And then he says, look at all of us with our kids. If they're not perfect angels and with tons of friends, high test scores, and straight A's, immediately we're looking for a reason. They're ADD, PDD, they have Asperger's. There are hormones in their milk, mercury in their tuna sandwiches. They're brain damaged from polio shots. I don't buy it. I think there are still some kids out there who are just flat out stupid. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. We need stupid kids. Without stupid kids, we can't identify the smart kids.
Yeah.
Is that your take, Peter, on parenting? Is that your philosophy?
I do look around and see what seems like incredible amounts of overparenting wherever I look. And I'm just amazed that it seems like 9 out of 10 kids have some kind of diagnosis. No matter what they're wrong, they seem to be diagnosed with something. The funny thing that also strikes me is that, it's a great thing for parents because it almost seems like it can never be, if there's something wrong with your kid or your kid's not going well, it can never be your fault anymore because there's got to be some kind of diagnosis that's causing this. And that's a great service because at the same time, it seems like there can be nothing worse than being labeled a bad parent now. You could be Nelson Mandela, but if you're not a good parent, everything else you've done pales next to the fact that you're a bad parent. And what strikes me strange about that is, everyone says being a parent is the hardest job there is. Well, if it's such a hard job, aren't there going to be a lot of people who suck at it?
Give people some slack.
I know. I really feel bad for parents now because what you have to live up to just to be considered a good parent seems incredible. And it just seems, and there's no alternative. If you go to medical school and you want to be a neurosurgeon, but you're not good at sewing back a wrist, you can go on to OBGYN or entomology or something like that, and you're held in high esteem for the rest of your life. These are hard jobs too, but if you're not good at it, you could live a good, productive life of esteem. But if you're a bad parent, that's it. That's what you are, a bad parent. And it's so funny considering our generation is the ones that have brought that on because, what has our generation done more than perfect the art of blaming our parents for everything? And now we're so rough on ourselves. So, I don't know. The hypocrisy of it all is kind of blinding.
The main character's father says this before he dies. He says, quote, "Religion is for people who can't accept that this is all there is." Does that sum up your view on religion?
It sums up my father's view on religion.
So this is autobiographical.
That part about my father was, I always just thought that my father didn't make pronouncements like that. He said it in a very casual, quiet way and kind of almost dismissively. But, it's funny that he would say something dismissive like that in his quiet way, and it would stick with me forever. And he didn't say that when he was dying. He said that when he was, a middle-aged man. He always felt that way. So I'm not exactly sure it's my view of things. In certain ways, I really can envy people who are very religious, who can believe in these kind of things. I'm sure it must be actually quite comforting. So,
But you don't. You personally,
I don't, but I don't poo-poo it either.
except in the book, where you skewer all
Yes.
religions.
Yes. I'm not, crazy about organized religion, but it might be nice to believe in something.
The novel we're discussing is called It Won't Always Be This Great. Peter Mehlman is a TV writer. He was a writer and producer for the TV show Seinfeld. Peter, why do you think Seinfeld was so successful?
The quick answer is just that it was funny. I think funny rules over everything else. There are a lot of smaller reasons. It tapped into a lot of thoughts that people always had but never really expressed. There was a lot of, I can relate to that. The show was full of stories that had tiny little moral dilemmas and tiny little thoughts that were kind of universal. People really related to it. You can relate to not remembering, meeting a woman and not being able to remember her name and just, going through an entire show of trying to maybe see her license or get, just all those things you could relate to. And another thing the characters were very real. I mean, flawed beyond belief, flawed to the point of actually not being very good people. That's another thing. We were talking about how it would seem funnier to write about a bad marriage than a good marriage. Well, it's funnier to write about bad people than it is about good people. And yet the TV networks always want you to have good people on the show, which is...
Right. Everybody's got to be good and attractive.
Right.
And young and...
Yeah. Another aspect of it, I think Elaine's character was really important to the show because you had this very pretty, intelligent character around whom conversations were going on that normally didn't take place in mixed company. I think she supplied a big service to everyone, made everyone kind of feel comfortable about having these awkward conversations. I mean, even the conversation that, Larry wrote about, about the masturbation thing, which never used the word, they had a contest and she was as much a part of it as any of the other characters. She was right in there with him. And so I always thought that you couldn't even write a really great Seinfeld episode unless, Julia Louis-Dreyfus had a very strong part in it.
How did you get that job?
Wanted.
No. Craigslist.
I moved out to Los Angeles in 1989 from New York, and in my last year or two in New York, I had met Larry David one or two times.
He was the executive producer.
Right. And then I bumped into him out here, and he said to me that he was, going to be doing this little TV show with Jerry Seinfeld. Why don't you give me a writing sample and I'll pass it on to Jerry? Maybe you could write a script.
And you knew Jerry Seinfeld at the
No, I
time,
did
or no?
not. No, I did not. And I had never written a script before. I was, I wrote full sentences. I wrote for magazines and...
You were a journalist.
I was a journalist, exactly. So I gave him an article, an essay I'd written in the New York Times Magazine. It was about, I had a breakup with a girl who was at Yale. I was going up every weekend to be with her. She was at Yale Business School. And so after we broke up, I wasn't very well grounded at planning solo weekends. So one day on one Saturday, I didn't know what to do with myself, and I ended up spending the entire day walking around New York till I spotted a celebrity, and then I'd go home. Because my friend and I had highly evolved eyes for spotting obscure celebrities in New York. So that's the article that I handed in. It was, that was the structure of the story. There were a lot of digressions about life and love in New York. And that was the article I passed on, and Jerry just took a shine to it, and I got a chance to write a script. It was the first time I really ever wrote dialogue or a script, and I lucked out. What
did you do? Get script writing for dummies to figure out how to do it?
No,
or?
I just, I got the cassettes of the only 3 or 4 episodes that they had produced to that point, and I watched them and I imitated. And I got lucky. The first one went really well. And next thing you know, I was loaded.
So, what's your favorite Seinfeld episode?
I'm very partial to Larry David's episode called The Deal, when Jerry and Elaine tried to work out a deal where they could sleep together and yet still maintain the exact same friendship. There was something about that. A, the negotiation they went through was just beautifully written and funny and great. And B, it was very indicative of what the show is about as far as trying to make a perfect world. There was a lot of episodes of Seinfeld and a lot of great stories where you're wondering, why can't this be done?
Yeah.
And it's so great to just try to make the world perfect, and it never really works.
And you came up with the phrase yada, yada, yada.
Yes.
And some of the other ones.
I popularized that phrase.
You popularized it.
Yes, I didn't. I didn't invent it.
You still hear it?
Yes. Yes. Well, it's in the dictionary now. So.
Oh, it's in the dictionary.
Yes, I got in the Oxford English Dictionary.
Yada, yada, yada.
Yes. Can you believe it?
I can't believe that.
No, it's crazy. I mean, the other ones didn't get it. My other ones didn't get in, but that one did. Spongeworthy and shrinkage and double dipping. Those were.
In the studio with me, he's a TV writer. He was a writer and producer for the TV show Seinfeld. His novel is called It Won't Always Be This Great. Do you want to go back to TV writing?
Only if it were just the greatest situation imaginable, which would be doing a show that I would find, a real passion project. I wrote one that, one pilot that I wrote it over 10 years ago, after Seinfeld, that nobody would let me do, but I still want to do it today. It was kind of like Airplane first and David Lynch all in one. It was a very dark, crazy comedy. And everyone was a little bit scared of it. I don't know what it was, but they didn't do it. I would do that one today. But, I don't need to. I don't really need to. It's it's a lot of, it's a crazy lot of work.
But why write a book? What?
I didn't plan it. I just started going, and it took on its own momentum, and to tell you the truth, I would have to say, why write a book? The answer would be joy. It was such a pleasure. I was so happy to get back to it all the time. I'm not a disciplined writer who forces myself to sit down and, write from 8 to 12, eat a steak and get back. But this was such a joy to write.
And this story was all kind of formulated in your head? You just kind of sat down and wrote it down?
Yeah, I didn't plan out the story.
Really?
No, I kind of did the driving by night theory of writing a novel that, you could finish a novel if you could just keep on going as far as your headlights will take you. So,
a lot of writers give this advice. They say, write what you know.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in that.
You think that's BS?
I think to a degree it's BS. There's certain, what I did in this book is basically put in some autobiographical details that would make things richer, but I don't think any of them are particularly important to the story. And writing what it's okay to a degree, but, also you're writing fiction. Shouldn't you make it up? And there's a certain arrogance in believing that writing what is going to be so important to everybody else. At least on Seinfeld, when we wrote these things and people related to it all, we were shocked. We thought we were just like big idiots. We just thought we were like weird idiots, and nobody's going to relate to this stuff.
It's a show about nothing.
Yeah, and then everybody was like, hey, yeah. People are always saying, God, I had the most Seinfeldian experience today.
So you're going to write another book?
I hope so. I am thinking about it.
You have an idea?
I wrote a screenplay, which I'm beginning to think might have been a better book. I wrote this screenplay that was optioned several years ago. It was about a Southern college girl who's from kind of, a rednecky background, but she happens to know for a fact that in a previous life she was Sigmund Freud.
Mm-hmm.
She remembers her entire life as Freud, and she's never left the state of Alabama, and she can speak German perfectly. She remembers everything. But what she most remembers is that she hated being Freud. It was horrible, being in the muck of everybody's problems. So this time, this ride through life, she just wants to have fun. And yet she's got this incredible skill of empathy and being able to diagnose people. So she's constantly talking kids off ledges and things like that. And she can't seem to escape her destiny. That was optioned, and for one brief, shining, beautiful moment, David O. Russell loved the script, and Jessica Biel was on board. And then, of course, it fell apart like like basically every screenplay does. And I was thinking, I just love that story, so I'm kind of like playing around with it. I think I have about 50 pages easily.
Peter Melman, TV writer. He was a writer and producer for the TV show Seinfeld. His novel is called It Won't Always Be This Great. Peter, thanks so much for being on the program.
Mimi, this was so much fun.
Thank you.